Okay, let's fix a few things and wrap this session up. For example, I'm going to define a new on-click listener for this button. Right now it doesn't have anyone. And also the button in edit activity, that one doesn't have an on-click listener as well. For example, if I add a plan by clicking on this edit in here, this button doesn't have an on-click listener. And also uh, let's add some about dialog as well. Right now, by clicking on this about dialog, nothing happens. Also, if we had time, I'm going to change the shape of these buttons and make them a little bit prettier. Okay, let's do everything that I just said. The first one is inside this plan activity. Let's set an on-click listener for this btn add plan. Inside this set on-click listener method, btn add plan.set on-click listener, new on-click listener. I'm just going to navigate to that all training activity. From plan activity.this to all training activity.class. Also, let's clear the backstack as well. Let's set flags. Start activity and pass input. The other one was in the edit activity. Let's copy all of these because basically these are the same. We are going to navigate to all training activity by clicking on this button as well. btn add more plan. But this time from edit activity. Okay, but inside the all training activity, I'm going to override the on backpressed and set the backstack manually to main activity. On backpressed, new intent from this to main activity. Main activity.class. Once again, I need to clear the backstack. Okay, let's create the dialog. Which simply I'm going to paste some values in here. Let's see the preview and see what I have just copied. A simple text, my website, and a button. And this color is some hexadecimal value which you can find by googling HTML color picker, or by clicking on this color I can select my customized color. Okay, let's create the Java file as well. Dialog about. It needs to extend from dialog fragment, logging, on create dialog, for this button I'm just going to dismiss the dialog. New on-click listener and dismiss. But for the text view, which is my website, I'm going to set an on-click listener and show the website. But we need to add that activity that will show the web view. Okay, let's create that activity. It will only contain a simple web view. match parent and match parent, and also an ID. We will pass the URL via an intent from dialog about to this activity. For that, let's get that URL. Let's say string URL is equal to intent dot get string extra and pass the URL as the key. Next, webview dot set webview client to a new webview client. We are doing this because we want to show the link in our application and not in some browser. Next, webview dot get setting dot set JavaScript enabled in order to enable the JavaScript in our webview. The other one, webview dot load, and we can pass our URL. Also, if you remember, we are going to enable the back button or back navigation for our web view. For that, on back pressed, I'm going to override, and if our web view dot can go back, then web view dot go back, but else in other situations this super dot on back pressed will happen. Okay, let's pass the URL via the intent. Let's delete this to do, and after that, let's set the on-click listener for that about button in order to show our dialog. In main activity, inside this set on-click listeners, btn about dot set on-click listener, new on-click listener, about dialog, new about dialog, dialog about dot show. Get support fragment manager to the constructor and a tag as well. Okay, let's run our application and see if those changes have been applied or not. First of all, by clicking on this About Us button, I should see the dialog. By pressing on this Go Back, it will dismiss the dialog. Also, by clicking on this URL in here, I should be navigated to the other activity, the WebView activity, and it will load my website, which is still loading. Means that I didn't create it yet. Also, let's check the on-click listener for the other buttons as well. In See Your Plan, we can add a plan in here, and also by pressing this back button, we should navigate back to main activity. Let's add another plan to our plans. For example, 20 minutes of this squat for Monday. By clicking on this edit, in our edit activity, this one should navigate us to this all training activity. Once again, by pressing this back button, we should be navigated to main activity. Okay, seems that everything works fine. Seems like we have a few minutes left, so let's change the shape and the color of those buttons. For that, I can create a new drawable resource file in here. New drawable resource file. I'm going to call it button default. First of all, I need to change this selector to shape because we are going to create a new shape, and inside this opening tag I can define some attribute called shape to rectangle. I have the other ones oval, and this line and ring of course doesn't mean anything for buttons. In here I'm going to stay with rectangle. Inside this opening and closing tags, I'm going to define a new element called solid. Basically, we can define a new color for our button via using this solid. We have another option called gradient. And the difference between gradient and solid is that with gradient you can have a spectrum of color, but with solid you will have only one color. Let's enable this preview as well. Okay, I can define an attribute called color and pass it some color. For example, hashtag FFF means white. Also, I can define another item called corners, which I can define some attribute called radius. Let's say 20 dp. Also, we can define another attribute called a stroke. With a stroke, we basically define some borderline. For example, in here, let's say black as the color of our border and a width of maybe 1 dp. It seems fine. This layout file will be the default background or the default color of our button. But every button has two other states. For example, when they are pressed or when they are disabled. For that, I'm going to copy this layout two more times and change some of these attributes in order to simulate those pressed and disabled situations. Let's say pressed. For that, I'm going to stay with some blue color in here, for example. This will be the color that when we press our button, we will see. Let's define another one for when the button is disabled. Let's paste it in here, name it button disabled. This time I'm going to stay with some gray color. For example, this one seems fine. Okay, I need to create another layout file in order to gather all of these layouts together. Let's say custom button. This time I'm going to stay with this selector. Instead, in here I'm going to create an item. I'm going to change the state pressed to true, and also drawable button pressed. Another item for when it's disabled, for that state enabled to false, and drawable to at drawable when our button is disabled. Another item for the default. This time I'm not going to change this state pressed or state enabled. I'm just going to define the drawable. Let's say at drawable button default, which I'm not finding. Okay, notice that the order of these items is important. You can't put this item above in here, and if you are, you should set the state press to true and set the state enable to false. Right now, I have created all the layout files in order to pass this layout to my buttons. Let's close all of these. For example, inside main activity layout, for these different buttons, I can set a background and pass my drawable custom button. As you can see, it will change the shape and the look of this button. If you want to apply this customized button to all of your buttons, you need to create a style, and then it will be applied to all of your buttons, but I'm just going to use it for these three buttons. Okay, let's run our application and see how does it look. Right now my buttons have a white shape, and by clicking on them I can see the blue background, which is nice. Okay, I think that's enough about this session. We have learned a lot in this session. We have learned about activities, dialogues, fragments. and a lot more. In the next video, we will learn how to do different things professionally in the background. For example, we will work with async task class, we will work with services, bound and unbound services, and also with job scheduler and maybe with working manager. See you in the next session.